Hello Year 10. In this week's lesson, we're going to go through some of what we did last week when you were in school. It was good to see you all, and explain some of what we'd like you to do for this week. So without further ado, let's get cracking. Share the screen. So at the end of last week's lesson, some of you may have got to this stage and some of you may have not, but this is what we were looking to do, which was to review the learning. So what was it that you should have covered? In what year was the text written? That's 1843. The new poor laws, which led to the introduction of the workhouses on one side and the prisons on the other side, the debtors' prisons, were introduced in 1834. And Dickens was writing in many respects because of his abhorrence of those laws, which created a society which was unjust, which was unfair, which led to those most in need being punished by the system that, in theory, was there to help them. The third question is the ghost of Marley is the first to visit Scrooge, and Marley's purpose is very much to warn Scrooge that unless he changes, unless there is transformation, metamorphosis, then if that doesn't happen, then Scrooge is likely to be condemned to a purgatory, limbo-like existence, neither in heaven nor in hell, but damned to be tortured by not being alive, seeing people suffer, and not being able to do anything about it. You should have covered the Ghost of Christmas Past at the beginning of Stave 2, and the ghost appears in white, primarily for reasons of representing purity, truth, innocence, naivety, but perhaps maybe also wisdom and knowledge. And I'll come back to that later on because we're going to be looking at the Ghost of Christmas Past in further detail. The authorial intention is already covered in many respects, but it's to highlight injustice. In many respects, the text is aimed at a middle-class readership who may have been like Scrooge. And if they are like Scrooge, then the whole purpose of it is Dickens aiming his writing at that group of people so that they bring about that change. They are, in theory, required to be introspective, to look inwards and consider, am I a Scrooge-like figure? Do I contribute to injustice, or do I seek to solve it? Do I seek to eradicate injustice or not? Eradicate meaning to make it go away, make it disappear. And then hopefully the skills that you used were, I suspect you'd have listened a good deal, you'd have read some challenging text, you'd have perhaps interrogated some of the language, you may have responded to some questions, but more than anything, it was about refamiliarizing you with some of the text. So as we move on in this lesson, this is the aim of it. We're aiming to consider the significance of the Ghost of Christmas Past. And you'll see that we've got three different depictions of the Ghost of Christmas Past in the imagery. On the left-hand side, covered in white, a white mist around her, deliberately a pictorial version of how the ghost represents youth and innocence, naivety, and so on. The second version in the middle of the screen here, from the animated version of the film from not so long ago, I think 2011, depicts the Ghost of Christmas Past as a flickering candle. In its hand there, if you see where the mouse is hovering, is a bonnet, a cap, which Scrooge will later use to try and extinguish that candle. He will try to put out its light. And we'll come to consider in further detail what that light means and what it symbolizes and what it represents. And then the third picture on the right-hand side, you can see with real human actors, depicts the ghost, again in white, lit up, illuminated, perhaps a better word. This time, I think, played by a male, but we'll come to see how in the text it is the Ghost of Christmas Past is genderless. It's neither male nor female. We might describe it therefore as androgynous. The point being that it doesn't really matter what gender the ghost is, it's more what it represents, what it means. So we're going to look at, as said there before, the significance of that ghost, the Ghost of Christmas Past. Now in your lesson, I certainly remarked upon this to the classes I taught. The main thing that we would like you to do between now and the end of this term, or the end of the summer holidays at the very least, is read the text. And in the first instance, that means reading the first 2 staves, the first 2 chapters. I'll briefly say why they're called staves. A stave is they're the 5 lines upon which musical notes are written. The text is called A Christmas Carol. Each stave represents a chapter. The whole reference to carols is that people would go to a church and they would sing these carols, and they're classless, these carols. They don't necessarily get targeted at just one group of people. Everyone can sing. And so if everyone can sing, then Dickens is deliberately playing us on this idea of a carol being a unifying force. It can bring everyone together. And by bringing everyone together, it encourages everyone at this time, at Christmas time, to consider how it is that they live in the Victorian period, how it is they live and treat others in 1843. If carols are sung in church, maybe sort of another interpretation would be that in theory it is the church which is supposed to be providing moral guidance, providing sort of spiritual clarity, in simple terms, telling people how it is that they should live their lives. But in many respects, Dickens appears to be kind of critiquing the church to a degree. So while the text is innately Christian, it's incredibly Christian, and Dickens was a Christian man who had strongly held Christian beliefs, he doesn't appear that keen on the institution of the church, in so much as they should provide that moral clarity I spoke of, but they don't seem to do it. And that's why we have a society which is sort of Malthusian. It's survival of the fittest. It allows the weakest to suffer, to rot away. And Scrooge is used as the emblem of this society, in so much as he allows that degradation, that decay, that rot to set in, and he doesn't do anything about it. So it's Scrooge's inaction, his lack of activity, that's really quite significant. Now the reason for the different colour screens, this one up here was green, was because it was from last week's lesson. This screen is also green. This is what you would have looked at. And so if you haven't done it, the task that followed is one that we would like you to do now. So, how does Dickens present the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come? Now this was based just on the section that you read, which we'll show you in a second, here. And the idea was that you were to use the phrases which are emboldened, in bold, and use those as the prompt, the stimulus for your work. So if you haven't done that, we want to get you back into the habit of writing and practicing writing, because that's how you're going to get good at it. Lionel Messi, probably not good at football through not playing football. One assumes he played lots of football, practiced kicking the ball with that left foot of his, got very, very good at football. So some of you who play football, maybe play the guitar, or who are good at things, whatever it is, chances are you're good at it because you do it a lot. You're going to get good at writing by practicing it. So that's an exercise in encouraging you, to do some practice. And as we move on, there was a further task from last week's lessons. This one not set in the classroom, but one that we certainly feel is well worthwhile your time. It's worth your time in doing, and doing it properly. Ultimately, these are character studies, whereby if you are able to pick out maybe 3 to 5 quotations for significant characters, such as Jacob Marley, then you are likely to be able to write about them really, really well. So that's what this was. Jacob Marley's quotation, or Dickens's quotation that Jacob Marley says, "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" So Marley addresses this to Scrooge in the first stave, the first chapter. And on the right-hand side of your screen, over here, where I now wiggle the mouse, you'll be able to see the notes that were made. So whether you do this as bullet points, whether you do it as a mind map, doesn't really matter. The point is having those quotations about a character and analysing them. In this instance, Marley's use of the personal pronoun I, so he uses I, indicates that responsibility must be taken. We could also say something about selfishness. Moving on, girded means he has, wrapped it round. As you can see me wiggling my arms around now, but he's wrapped it round his trunk, around his waist, and it's a word which implies that it's been done deliberately. You don't get something wrapped around your waist by chance. So he's using this word girded to imply a kind of force, which is reinforced then by the word forged. So in this instance, forged, is about how you'd make metal. And as it says on the screen, you'd make metal by hammering it with lots and lots of power, with effort, with time. And so Marley is telling Scrooge that he has kind of imprisoned himself through his own ill-informed, terrible choices. And as a consequence, that's why he's there for Scrooge, to try and to give Scrooge the chance to escape that fate. Link by link suggests that each link is an individual choice that's made. And it's a metaphor that illustrates over the course of life that Marley has made hundreds, if not thousands, of choices that now imprison him as he is. Is its pattern strange to you? The use of the question, the direct address to Scrooge, but also, if Scrooge is the middle class reader, a direct address to the reader, asking us, are we like Marley? Are we like Scrooge? Are we like these men, these capitalists, middle class, who have the capacity to make the lives of others good, but they choose not to make the lives of others good? Because if we are like them, then we need to transform, we need to morph into something better pretty rapidly, or else we will face the consequences in the next life. And in last week's set of lessons, this was what we wanted you to then turn that into, was a piece of writing which ultimately said what Scrooge was like. At the beginning of the text, Scrooge is presented as not very nice, but as a consequence of meeting the portly gentleman in the first stave, he becomes. And you would use these series of sentence starters to push yourselves in the right direction. Now, whether you're looking at this in June, July of 2020, or perhaps you come across this on the YouTube channel at some point in the future for revision, it's there on the screen. Use it, practice the act of writing. It will make you get better. Certainly better than if you don't do it. Now, for this week's lesson, we are primarily going to focus on this task here. How does Dickens present the ghost of Christmas past? There are some of the answers, but I'm going to move away from that now, and we'll have a look at the text itself. Now, in last week's lessons, you would have read with your teacher from the beginning of Stave 2 to this moment here, which you can see highlighted on the screen. I am the ghost of Christmas past. So we were introduced to the ghost of Christmas past, and we focused on this section here. And we are told a number of important things. It's a strange figure, it's both young and old. Its youth is important because it suggests innocence and purity. Its age is important because age may be indicative, suggestive. It may imply, I like indicative. Age may be indicative of wisdom. We're told then how its hair hangs down its neck and back, and the hair is white as if with age, and yet there's no wrinkles on the face. This is important again because Dickens is deliberately constructing the ghost as both young and old, and these series of contrasts are being created all the way through this section of the text. Why? Because we need that contrast of youth, innocence with wisdom. Maybe it's important as to why the ghost is neither male nor female, because it doesn't really matter. We don't want to get into the dangerous territory of implying that wisdom comes from men only, or something absurd like that. It also rather suggests that the past, it could be something that we could apply to any member of society. So in this instance, it's Scrooge, but it doesn't matter. It could be any other middle-class member of society who needs to be introspective, who needs to look inwards at the way that they view the rest of the world. We have further series of contradictions in so much as the ghost holds holly, sort of a winter plant, so typically associated with Christmas, and yet has its dress trimmed with summer flowers. So these contradictions are important because Scrooge must learn from a character who is full of contradictions, and maybe the point here could be that Scrooge himself is also full of contradictions, and maybe contradictions aren't necessarily unusual. Either way, Scrooge has to learn from this ghost, and he must learn as quickly as he can, or else he will suffer. So let's move on to the actual text. I am the ghost of Christmas past is where we got to. And we're going to read from that section. I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? Inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish nature. No, your past. Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. What? Exclaimed the ghost. Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and force me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow? Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. Your welfare, said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, thanks very much, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest, I'd quite like to sleep, he says, would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, Your reclamation then. Take heed, pay attention, listen. It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. Rise, and walk with me. It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour, the time of the day, were not well suited to going outside to pedestrian purposes. That bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing. That he was clothed, but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold about him at the time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, Scrooge rises, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. He's sort of dragging back as if he doesn't want to go. I am a mortal, Scrooge remonstrated, and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand there, said the spirit, laying it upon his heart. Rise it up, and you shall be upheld in more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields on either hand. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige, not a tiny smidgen of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. Now I'll pause there just for a moment to go through some of the bits that are being covered, that are in the text so far. Now we started here at the top of the page. The line that we can see at the top here, perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap. We're being told here that Scrooge is uncomfortable with the light thrown out by the ghost of Christmas past, and he wants to put a cap on top of it, cap it on its head, to bonnet it. Now, if the light here represents truth, if the light represents a kind of guiding light, then it's significant symbolically that Scrooge would seek to remain in the darkness. I exhale like that, I breathe out, because it's cheesy. It's so cringy. That Scrooge is in the dark and he must follow the light. But it's valid, it works. And at this particular moment, Scrooge doesn't really know why, but he wants to bonnet that light. He wants to hide it. He wants to extinguish it. He's so discomforted that he doesn't want to be anywhere near it. Scrooge is a friend of the dark. Maybe he's a friend of evil. Maybe that's too strong. The ghost then asks, "What? Really? I can't believe it. Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? So would you really extinguish me so soon? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap? Isn't it good enough for you," he says, "that it's men like you, that it's greedy, miserly, Malthusian figures like you, Ebenezer Scrooge, who have extinguished the light? Isn't it men like you that mean that so many have to exist in that darkness? That you force me to wear it low upon my brow, that you force me to hide my light." Scrooge says, "Oh no, I don't want to, not me, Gov, not me, boss. I don't want to cause any offence." He disclaimed all intention to offend, or nothing to do with me, or knowledge of having willfully done it. And then he asks, "Why are you here?" The ghost says, "Your welfare. I am here for you. I am here for your spirit. I'm here for your soul. I'm here for the goodness that resides within you that I must bring about. Your welfare means I'm here to help you redeem yourself." Scrooge says, "Oh, thanks very much. I'm much obliged. Cheers, Gov, again. But oh gosh, I think I'd feel better with a good night's sleep." No, come on. The ghost hears that, says, right, in that case, it's your reclamation. I'm doing it for you. You don't get a choice. Take heed, listen, pay attention. So what we've got here is a ghost which is both gentle on one hand, but also commanding. Take heed. Take heed is an instruction. We'd call it an imperative verb. And so we have these contrasts with the Ghost of Christmas Past all the way through this section. Gentle and commanding. We see it here again. It puts out its strong hand. So strength, strong hand. But note the contrast here. Clasped him gently. Clasp implies a reasonably firm grip, like you're hanging on. Clasp. It's hard to escape a clasp, something. A zipper on a coat is a kind of clasp. Once the zip is in place, it's kind of hard to unzip it sometimes. So it's a clasp, but it's a gentle clasp. And maybe the point of this is that the ghost is there to guide Scrooge, but maybe there is an understanding. Maybe there is a recognition that Scrooge needs help. So guiding, pushing in the right direction, but Scrooge requires a kind of kick in the backside. He needs forcing. The problem with forcing anyone to change is that it's unlikely to last. And so the Ghost of Christmas Past has to guide him, but firmly enough so that it can work, so that there is a more permanent kind of change. In this section here, rise and walk with me, we have more imperative verbs, more bossy verbs, more instructional verbs. What I mean by this. Rise, walk with me. He's not saying, oh, come on, get up. Do you want to get up? Do you want to? Oh, go on. Do you want to come for a walk? No, it's rise, walk with me. So Scrooge can't argue with that. It's so commanding, so forceful that Scrooge is left without choice. If Scrooge is allowed choice, then he might make the same choices that Marley has made all the way through his life. He girded on that chain with his own free will. Scrooge needs to have less choice because he makes poor decisions, poor choices. I'll briefly linger on this point, rise and walk with me, because it also has, I think, a really quite significant Christian undertone, overtone. It's reasonably apparent. In the Bible, Jesus has disciples. They are followers, and he asks them to walk with him, to follow him, because by walking with him, I'm doing this with my hands, they are joining with him. They are becoming part of his group of believers. So his disciples are his followers. And by walking with him, they are now in a kind of communion. They're together and they're going on their journey, in this case, to try and reclaim Scrooge, to reclaim him as a good person, a person who has the capacity for love, compassion, benevolence. Goodness is what that means, benevolence. Scrooge realizes that it would be in vain to say that the weather and the time of the day wasn't really a good idea. So he goes on. The grasp, again, though gentle as a woman's hand, it's a bit sexist, I think. There is a kind of undertone of sexism in much of Dickens's work, but anyway, I won't dwell on that. The grasp, again, grasp, strong, maybe the woman's hand suggestive of a kind of gentleness. Either way, Scrooge can't resist it, he must go, and so he is taken on his way there. And where is he taken? He's taken to a place where the darkness and the mist had vanished. We know at the beginning of the text that the darkness and the mist is suggestive of Scrooge's inability to see. Dickens deliberately constructs the beginning of the text in this way so that Scrooge cannot see the man that he has become. He is in the literal darkness. It's actually dark outside, and it is actually misty outside, but this is, of course, metaphorical. He will be shown the light. He will be guided by the ghost of Christmas past and the other two ghosts. And the mist, which has made it so difficult for him to see the man that he has become, has also been evaporated. It's disappeared out of the way. And he is now in an environment at Christmas, presumably because it's a cold winter's day with snow upon the ground, but it is clear and it is bright. This is a time when people can see the way that you're supposed to live. Let's carry on reading. Good heaven, said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. I was bred in this place. I was a boy here. The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's sense of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 smells, odours floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. Smell is a memory, we're being told there. Smell is a memory. He's being transported back to a particular location as a consequence of what he is smelling. The ghost observes. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost. And what is that upon your cheek? Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. You recollect the way? Inquired the spirit. Remember it? Cried Scrooge with fervour. I could walk it blindfold. Strange to have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let us go on. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognising every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church and winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers, so horses and carts, gigs and carts. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed to hear it. We're just being taken back to the joy of youth here, boys shouting with one another. These are but shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. They have no consciousness of us. The jocund, the happy travellers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why, he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them. Why did his cold eye glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas. What good had it ever done him? The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still. Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. Pausing there because we have an emotionally resonant point. It's a big deal, emotionally a big deal. It's resonant. It's an emotionally resonant point. Scrooge, our cold-hearted miser, has been shown his youth, only the very beginnings of his youth. The ghost observes that there is a solitary child, neglected by his friends, left abandoned, left isolated, and Scrooge starts blubbing. Dickens is deliberately manipulating the reader to feel a kind of empathy for Scrooge. We feel sorry for him, this poor abandoned boy left on his own. It's human to pity him. However, why is Scrooge crying? Self-pity, isn't it? Nothing to do with caring about others. This is just self-absorption on a grand scale. And so maybe Dickens is actually encouraging us to see Scrooge as a deeply flawed character who we can both feel compassion and empathy for, at the same time as really finding him quite objectionable because of his self-absorption. We must remember at this moment that Scrooge is a caricature, and if we were to feel wholly negative towards him, then the message and the moral of the text, the allegory, the underpinning political or religious or moral message would be lost. So we have to see Scrooge as flawed, but with redemption, the ability to change as possible. Otherwise, what's the point? So Scrooge is more anti-hero than villain. He's more anti-villain. Sorry, he's more anti-hero than he is antagonist by this stage of the text. And by the end of the text, he becomes a sort of more heroic figure to a degree. Anyway, he changes, he transforms, he metamorphs for the good, and we must admire him for that by the end. Carrying on, we're not going to do too much more reading. They left the high road by a well-remembered, I can say it, they left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick with a weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes. The spacious offices were little used. Their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked, chickens clucked and strutted in the stables, and the coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more retentive of its ancient state within. For entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold and vast. There was an earthy savour, sort of a damp smell in the air, a chilly bareness in the place, which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, along the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, sad, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. It's a school, I'll tell you that, interjection. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a form and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. So we're being told here about the education system. This is Dickens's way of critiquing the education system, which is decaying. If the buildings are decaying, then the system is decaying because it's allowing the buildings to decay. This isn't school as Dickens would like to see it. Moving on. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the panelling, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent tree, one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence and gave a freer passage to his tears. Scrooge, he's crying, cry, cry, cry. You know, everything is just making him cry. So we're seeing Scrooge here as a man who has the ability to feel sorrow. Maybe it's self-sorrow, self-pity, but he isn't completely iced over. You may remember in the first stave, Dickens informs us that Scrooge, you know, he wouldn't ice anything over even in the dog days. Ultimately, it's a way of saying he's so cold, he's so icy that he doesn't thaw, he doesn't defrost, as it were, not even a degree at Christmas time. So by taking us back to Scrooge as a young boy and seeing him blub, we feel sorrow for him, but we begin to understand why he is the way he is. Arguably, he's a product of his environment and a product of his upbringing. The problem with that line of argument will always be that there will be plenty of people in this world who've had pretty shoddy upbringings that maybe aren't incredibly fortunate or fortuitous, but they're not all miserly, miserable, cold, empty-hearted beasts like Scrooge. So I'm deliberately introducing this idea of debate about his character all the way through it. It's not simple with Scrooge. Reading on, we're here. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, and leading by the bridle, by a lead, an ass, a horse, a donkey, I should say, laden with wood. "Why, it's Ali Baba!" Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. "It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know. One did come for the first time, just like that. Poor boy. And Valentine," said Scrooge, "and his wild brother Orson, there they go. And that's what's his name, who was put down in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus. Don't you see him? And the Sultan's groom turned upside down by the genie, there he is upon his head. Serve him right. I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess?" It's like Scrooge has gone mad. And that's what we're told here. To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects in a most extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened, excited face, would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. So I'm exaggerating everything, hands, arms, silly facial gestures, because we're being told here that Scrooge is a dour, unfeeling man. So to see him emote, to see him project any kind of emotion, to emote, is truly noteworthy. It's remarkable. So what's the significance? What's the purpose of the Ghost of Christmas Past? It allows us to see Scrooge as human. He's not a robot. He carries on. "There's the parrot," cried Scrooge. "Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is. Poor Robin Crusoe, he called him, when he came home again after sailing around the island. Poor Robin Crusoe. Where have you been, Robin Crusoe?" The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. It was the parrot, There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Halloo, halloo, halloo. Then, with a rapidity, a speed of transition, of movement, change, very foreign to his usual character, he said, in pity for his former self, "Poor boy," and cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him after drying his eyes with his cup. "But it's too late now." "What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully, waved its hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Bum, bum, bum. We are really supposed to see how Scrooge is already on his transformation. He's already on his way to I can never say it. Metamorphosizing. Gosh, but he's transforming, morphing into a better character. So as a consequence of seeing what he used to be like, he begins to introspect, look within himself, and realize, there was a boy singing a Christmas carol, singing a song. I chucked a ruler at him. I regret that. I don't think that was the right thing to do. The ghost doesn't offer any comment, just smiles thoughtfully. Let's see another one. Why? Because judgment doesn't really work. Scrooge must go on his own journey towards changing. He must do it himself as much as possible, because then the change is likely to last. Judgment might negate that. Judgment might make it not happen. So they go and see one more Christmas. They go and see a few more, but we're going to see one more. Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling, and the naked lathes were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that here he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. Scrooge, alone again. Note there that little description, that little clause in the middle of the sentence. But the most important word is again, because it's telling us that it's commonplace, it's regular. He's an isolated boy, and therefore is it surprised that he's become an isolated man? Perhaps not. Reading on, he was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms about his neck and often kissing him, addressed him as her dear, dear brother. "I've come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hand and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be. At home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed, but I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you." "You ought to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and then never to come back here. But first, we're to be together all the Christmas long and have the merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a woman, little Fan." She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again, and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him, in her childish eagerness, towards the door, and he, nothing loath to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there!" And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with a ferocious looking down on him condescension, and threw him into a dreadful state of mind by shaking hands with him. God forbid, teacher shakes your hand. Terrifying. He then conveyed him and his sister into the veriest old well of a shivering best parlour, the best room that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall and the celestial and terrestrial globes in the windows were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine and a block of curiously heavy cake, and gave instalments of those dainties, the wine and the cake, to the young people, at the same time sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy, who answered that he thanked the gentleman, but if it was the same tap as he had tasted before, he'd rather not. It was the same muck, filth you gave me, no thanks. Master Scrooge's trunk being by this time tied on to the top of the chaise, the cart, the children bade the schoolmaster goodbye right willingly. Thank God, let's get rid of him. And getting into it, drove gaily, happily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoar frost and snow from the dark leaves of the evergreens like spray. "Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost. "But she had a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, Spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, and had, as I think, children. One child, Scrooge returned. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, yes. Now I'm going to pause the reading for there at that point for this particular video. Before we move to the sort of actual task itself, I'll just explain a few bits and pieces about that section. Little Fan is the embodiment of open, big-hearted love. And we are being shown here, Dickens is revealing to us that Scrooge, although he has led an isolated life, has not led a life without love at all. There has been some love there. Yes, there is a father figure who is described as monstrous, or there is the implication of a father figure who has in his past been difficult, challenging. But that's no longer the case because Scrooge is being collected by his darling sister, who is going to take him home again. We're told, the ghost tells us that Little Fan was always a sickly person. A breath of wind might have knocked her over and made her pass away. And she does die as an older woman with one child, Fred. But the point is that Fred is like his mother, Little Fan. He is a loving, open, big-hearted being, human being with compassion. And if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so if Fred is like his mother, then, and obviously Little Fan and Scrooge are related, Ebenezer Scrooge are related, then it suggests that Scrooge has the capacity for love as well, but it's just been buried and locked away. That precious pearl that we saw in the description of as solitary as an oyster, maybe that pearl is representative and suggestive, symbolic of love. But Scrooge is like that oyster, which has locked it away with that hard outer shell for a prolonged period of time. And it requires someone to come and open and prise that oyster and that shell open so we can see the precious pearl inside. The other point about this section here that I'll just highlight, we hear about the terrible voice in the hall, and it's a schoolmaster. Now, schoolmasters probably, well, the stereotype is that they are evil sods who delighted in making children's life difficult, who would punish them physically. But even, the point is that even the terrible voice that belongs to the schoolmaster, who glares at Scrooge with a ferocious condescension, really looking down at him, there's dirt on the bottom of his shoe, shakes his hand. Even horrible, cold, unfeeling men like schoolmasters shake the hands of young boys as they go off for Christmas. Even horrible, cold, unfeeling schoolmasters give a glass of something to the postboy and offer a bit of cake to the departing student and his sister. So we're being told once more that Scrooge at the beginning of the text really is an ogre. He's a monster of a man because he rejects all human interaction. And other caricatures like the schoolmaster do not. So Dickens is making this point of comparing sort of similar people so that we can see that in terms of it as a scale, Scrooge is still more severe as a figure than the rest of society. One final point, I made the reference to weather, to frost, to darkness, to mist, to cold, and so on earlier in the text. We can briefly highlight here that when Little Fan comes to collect Scrooge, they're able to dash off the hoarfrost. They're able to kind of get rid we're basically seeing the environment defrost. It's thawing, Thawing. So this is an environment where love, maybe it brings a kind of heat which thaws things. The point being that with love, with family, with community, with human connection, there is the chance for happiness. And Scrooge has somewhere along the line lost his way. Now, if we return to this question, how does Dickens present the ghost of Christmas past? Just in that section we've read, here in many respects are some answers that you could consider. So, of course, at the beginning of the text, Scrooge is he's a baddie, he's a wrong 'un. We would like you to elevate your vocabulary to make that much more articulate and sophisticated. Why is Scrooge so dislikable at the beginning? Well, this stave with the ghost of Christmas past introduces us to the concept of redemption, and we begin to see how Scrooge has a past that he can learn from. The ghost represents a candle which obviously illuminates things, and Scrooge was in the darkness and he needs this guiding light to direct him towards a more spiritually true, a more virtuous, that's a good word, better word than what I just said, a more virtuous path. So Scrooge is taken on that journey to his past, and we begin to see how he's a product of his environment. He was left isolated, he was cold, abandoned. The question is, does that excuse him? Do we feel sympathy for him? Do we let him off the hook a little bit because of that? And that's what we want you to tell us what you think. Don't tell your teachers what I've said or what they may have said. You say what you think. The ghost is allegorical. Scrooge is allegorical. All the characters are allegorical. They convey a sort of message that's hidden not so subtly in the text. What does the ghost symbolize? Wisdom, because it's both young and old, naivety, innocence, but it's the combination thereof, the contrast of innocence that comes with youth and wisdom that maybe comes with age. We see how Scrooge feels. I'm going to rephrase that. We see how Scrooge feels. We see how Scrooge has the capacity to feel something, because we've not seen it in the first stave, other than fear. He feels love. He feels joy, the memories of Ali Baba and so on. He feels sorrow. Maybe it's self-pitying, but he does. He feels a little bit sorry for the way he treated his nephew, Fred, and there is a sense of remorse for the boy who was singing the Christmas carol. He says, I'd like to have given him something. And the whole point of him being able to feel something is that it reveals a kind of a human compassion. There is a human lurking within, but it was within that kind of oyster-like confinement. And that's why solitary as an oyster is there. Scrooge is constructed to be self-pitying, as I've alluded to. How do you feel about that? Is self-pitying too strong a phrase for you? Do you think Scrooge is entitled to blub? Is the blubbing, the sobbing, it says in the text, is that too much? What do you think? The ghost is not judgmental. The ghost is both gentle and kind at the same time as being commanding. Tell me why. Tell me why, tell your teacher what's significant about that. Why is it helpful to have a ghost, have a spiritual guide that doesn't preach and tell him why he's wrong? And finally, the ghost doesn't speak a great deal. Consider why that may be. It has much the same reasons as its being a gentle and yet commanding figure. Scrooge must go on this journey. It's a cheesy, quick cliche, I'm afraid, but Scrooge must go on this journey from the darkness to the light. He must learn over the course of his time with the ghosts that transformation must occur. But if he changes solely for reasons of self-preservation, if he changes only to escape his fate, but he doesn't really learn anything, then it's all kind of meaningless. We must remember that Scrooge is not a real character. Scrooge is emblematic. He's an emblem. He's emblematic. He represents. He is emblematic of wider middle-class society. And so if we want wider middle-class society to alter, to change, to transform, to morph their behaviour, then perhaps judgment isn't the right way to do it. Perhaps we need to allow these figures to see the error of their ways for themselves. And that's why silence may be the right way to go. So, in terms of what you do, we'd like you to have a go at writing this up. So there are two things really that we want you to achieve as a consequence of this week's lessons. One, read the text, read Stave One and Stave Two. Just type in A Christmas Carol full text. It appears on the screen. It's freely available on the internet. Do that. If you don't have a text, do that. And two, practice your writing. The way that you'll get better at writing is by doing it. You won't get better at it by not doing it. So write up your answer to this question in about 400 to 600 words, which is about 2 sides of writing in a regular exercise book, maybe a little bit more, 2.5 sides of writing. But we want you to use the points that are on the screen now. And if you do that and submit it to your teachers on the Google Classroom, we're likely to be pretty happy indeed. What we want to achieve is so that when we see you again on the last week of term, we're all in a similar place, as it makes teaching much more straightforward. And it also gives you the confidence that when you turn up, that you know what you're doing. Because when we know what we're doing, that brings confidence with it too. That's it for the time being. I say that's it. I know that this has been reasonably long. I'll smile at that one. Couldn't seem to do it much quicker, I'm afraid. But we'll leave it there and say thank you very much. If you have any questions, ask away. Ask your teachers. Ask me if you want to. If you need to, that's more than fine. But give it your best. And as I say, we look forward to seeing you in the future lessons. Thanks very much. Bye for now.